First off, the airplane will not leave on the autopilot. The airplane will not leave altitude without pilot intervention. You have to physically reach up there, reselect a new altitude, and then move that selector switch, either push it or pull it, depending upon what kind of descent you want to do. You have to physically move that switch to get that aircraft to initiate that descent.
As we welcome you back to America's Forum, that was Ron Stock, who's a captain who flies the Airbus A320 model, very similar to the one that crashed into the French Alps. And he explains that the autopilot feature cannot be changed without direct pilot intervention. Now, it's been reported, as we know, we've talked about it the past couple of days, that on that Germanwings flight, the co-pilot, Andreas Lubitz, changed the autopilot setting to put the aircraft at 100 feet, its lowest possible setting. To go further in depth, let's bring in air safety expert Todd Curtis. Todd is the president of airsafe.com. He is Skyping in this morning from California. Todd, you flew out west on an Airbus. You know the airplane. Give us your take on the accident and what transpired.
Well, I literally got the news flash about the suspicion of the co-pilot while I was in the air in an A320. I was sitting in row 3, and I was looking directly at the door the whole time, imagining in my mind, is there any way, given the technology of the armored cockpit door and the other protections that are put into the forward part of the airplane, is there any way they could have got through there in 5 or 8 minutes' time? And frankly, I couldn't figure out a way to make that happen.
And so now we know there is a difference in policy. It's about to change in Europe. But of course, here, post 9/11, you have to have 2 people in the cockpit at all times. Obviously, that changed here in the wake of 9/11. I just have a question. Now the Europeans are catching up to this, but sadly it comes late.
Well, that's a bit of a question on my part, because the rules obviously were different in different parts of the world. In the U.S., the very clear rule was if there was a pilot out of the cockpit, the other pilot would stay in and don an oxygen mask. But it isn't even clear to me if it was strictly enforced on all aircraft that you would have a second person in there. And just one example for you, on your smaller regional airliners, where you may have literally just one flight attendant, did the rules enforce them to have that flight attendant in there and no one in the cabin, which would impose its own security and safety concerns? So I would like to see some clarification from the FAA as to what exactly the rule was, not just on the larger aircraft where you have plenty of flight attendants, but on even those smaller ones.
Again, let's amplify. So you've got some concerns in the here and now with FAA policy in terms of regional jets, smaller aircraft, regional airlines here domestically, in terms of flight deck access and who can be where at what time.
Absolutely, because if you literally enforce this rule for even the 10 seats or above aircraft, and remember, in the last 20 years or so, there's been one level of safety. From the small regional jets to the largest jumbo jets, there should be one level of safety. Is the FAA going to enforce this rule to the point that you could have a situation where there are 2 people in the cockpit, and let's say a pilot in the lavatory, and absolutely no one in the cabin?
I've got something else I want to talk to you about. My former colleague, Bob Walker, who used to chair the Science Committee in the House of Representatives, he was here with us on this program yesterday. He posed a question. I'd like you to listen to it and then get your take on Bob's interrogative here.
I chaired a commission a while back that recommended that we get to the point in air traffic control that we can go to autonomous flight. Given the fact that we learned this morning that it was probably human desire to bring down the airplane that was the problem with this recent flight, doesn't autonomous flight, providing we can provide the kind of security that's necessary, may that not be safer?
I guess what we ought to do right now, Todd, is define autonomous flight, and then you respond to Bob's question there.
Well, autonomous flight, is one simple definition is the aircraft is being remotely controlled either from a pre-programmed route or from someone on the ground, much like Predators and Reapers are being controlled in the Middle East from bases here in the U.S. But it could also mean something beyond that. For example, the ability to go from having human beings running the aircraft to being taken over remotely by ground control or from another aircraft. And this imposes its own set of challenges, not the least of which is regulatory and safety and security.
So mindful of that, this notion of autonomous flight, and you talk about safety and security, do you think we're going to go to that, and what kind of safeguards will we have to have in place?
Well, for reasons separate from the kind of security concerns that have been arisen by this last crash, we may be going there for economic reasons. For example, not too long ago, there was a bit of a conflict with the regulatory agencies as to whether or not drones can be allowed to do commercial flight. Well, I just read recently that the FAA granted Amazon a limited ability to test the concept of autonomous drone delivery. It's an easy step to imagine the large cargo carriers like UPS and FedEx perhaps proposing that they would have autonomously controlled cargo aircraft, which of course aren't carrying passengers, and maybe flying to airports not used by commercial airliners. But certainly the technology is there. It's just a question of the regulatory and the financial will to make it happen.
And of course, I can imagine a few pilots would say, hey, wait a minute. You don't want hackers having access. How much will that argument carry weight? And also the fact that pilots are human and they can vote in elections.
Well, absolutely. Again, these are issues that are a combination of policy and technology and human emotions. Myself personally, I wouldn't want to be a passenger in an aircraft that's being autonomously flown, but I wouldn't mind if my package is being flown in an aircraft that has no human beings at the controls. And it's that sort of mentality which there might be a transition. Perhaps there will be a time when that's acceptable. Case in point, many of you, if you've been to airports long enough, have probably been on an autonomous train where there's no train driver and you're going in between terminals. I don't think twice about it anymore because they've been proven to be safe. Much different situation than flying an aircraft, but there is a possibility of having transportation systems that don't have people in the driver's seat.
Todd Curtis, as an aviation expert, aviation safety expert, who joins us via Skype from California. As you head back east, we know a pilot will be at the controls, and wherever we next see you, we look forward to having you back to talk more about these very important air safety issues. For now, sir, our thanks, and enjoy your time out in California, where it's much earlier in the morning. Got your whole day ahead of yourself. Thank you, Todd. We do appreciate your time. Coming back, it's back out to California, next to Hollywood with James Herson, following this Newsmax Now update.